A ceremonial sitting to mark the passing of the Honourable Austin Asche, ACKC.
Yes, we welcome everybody in attendance here today. The court is sitting this afternoon to honour the late, the Honourable Austin Asche, ACKC, a former justice of this court who sadly passed away on the 14th of December last year at 99 years of age. Sitting on the bench this afternoon with the permanent and additional judges of this court is former Chief Justice and now Acting Justice Trevor Riley AO. We're also joined on the bench today by the Honourable David Angel KC, a distinguished former member of this court who was appointed and served during Austin's tenure as Chief Justice. We're particularly honoured to be joined on the bench today by the Honourable Justice Robert McClelland AO, the Deputy Chief Justice of the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia, and the Honourable Elizabeth Evatt AC. In one of his past lives, Deputy Chief Justice McClelland was a good friend to the Northern Territory legal profession and a frequent visitor to the Territory. The Honourable Elizabeth Evatt was the first Chief Justice of the Family Court of Australia and in fact the first female judge appointed to any federal court in this country. She has been a distinguished jurist in many roles, both before and after that time, and was a former colleague of Austin when he served on the family court. We're also honoured today by the presence of Austin's family and his friends. As most in attendance will know, Austin's daughter Wendy is a respected anthropologist who devoted herself to Austin in his final years, and we particularly welcome her here today. We also particularly thank those family members and friends who have travelled great distances to be here in celebration of Austin's life today. We also acknowledge the presence of former administrators, the Honourable Sally Thomas AC and the Honourable Vicky O'Halloran AO CVO. Sally was one of Austin's colleagues during his tenure as Chief Justice and sometime later followed him into the office of Administrator. Austin was a mentor to Vicky in a number of roles and she in turn was one of his star proteges who also followed him into the office of Administrator. We also acknowledge the presence here today of the Solicitor General, Mr Nikolai Kristrup SC, the Vice-Chancellor of Charles Darwin University, Professor Scott Bowman AO, the Acting Independent Commissioner Against Corruption, Mr Greg Shanahan PSM, the Chief Executive Officer of the Department of Corrections, Commissioner Matthew Varley, the Head of the Anti-Discrimination Commission, Commissioner Jeswin Yogaratnam, and the Honorary Consul for Denmark, Mr Hamish Badley SC. We also extend our particular appreciation to the President of the Australian Bar Association, Ms Roisin Annesley KC, and the immediate past President of the Association, Mr Peter Dunning KC, for honouring both Austin and his family and us with their attendances here today. The court will be addressed in turn this afternoon by the Solicitor General on behalf of the Attorney General, the President of the Australian Bar Association, the Vice President of the Northern Territory Bar Association, Dr Cameron Ford, OAM, the President of the Law Society, Mr Richard Henschke, and by Mr John Stirk, representing the Alice Springs legal profession. I would only say by introduction that Austin Asche was a towering figure in the public life and history of both this court and the Northern Territory more generally. I will leave it, however, to our speakers to detail his life and the nature of that contribution in greater detail. Thank you, Mr Solicitor.
Thank you, Chief Justice. I appear on behalf of the Attorney General and the Northern Territory Government. The Honourable Mary Claire Boothby MLA regrets that she is unable to attend today and she has asked me to convey her apologies. I acknowledge the Arikea peoples as the traditional owners of this land and I pay my respects to elders past and present. The Northern Territory extends their deepest sympathies to all of Austin Asche's family, including his children Wendy and Harry and his many children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Keith John Austin Asche was appointed as a judge of this court on the 14th of April 1986. The resident members of the bench at the time were Chief Justice O'Leary and Justices Nader, Carney, Maurice and Rice. His Honour was appointed from the Family Court of Australia, where he had already served for more than 10 years. Over a year later, Chief Justice O'Leary sadly had to retire on grounds of ill health, and Justice Asche replaced him in that office on the 17th of August 1987. He was to serve as Chief Justice of this court for over half a decade, before accepting appointment as the 15th Administrator of the Northern Territory in March 1993, a position that he would then hold for 4 years. His Honour's decisions from this court were reported on well over 100 occasions. His judgments are erudite, incisive, and easily understood. I will leave it to others to take the court to a selection of the more remarkable passages of the many reasons he published. However, I will make one observation. I selected a case from a list of His Honour's judgments, the Court of Criminal Appeal decision in the Queen and Jabalchari, a case concerning the role of a guilty plea in the sentencing process. His Honour's analysis demonstrates not only a great depth of legal knowledge and a clarity of expression evidencing a complete command of the English language, but also reflects that most valuable of commodities, common sense. But Austin Asche was a soldier before he was a lawyer. His father, Lance Montpellier Eric Thomas Asche, served in the Great War in France and Belgium in the 2nd Battery of the 1st Australian Field Artillery Brigade. He was awarded the Military Medal for action at St. Quentin Canal, a waterway which formed part of the German defensive Hindenburg Line in the northern France. He was rewarded this for bravery when he, on the 29th of June 1918, kept up communications after laying a ground line under heavy shell fire. He was subsequently gassed during the Battle of Bellicourt, and Austin and his siblings grew up, witnessing the devastating effect that this had on their father's health. He lived only to his mid-40s, leaving Austin's mother with sole responsibility for the 5 children. Since 2012, there's been a Darwin Street devoted to the memory of his father. Fittingly, it can be found in Muirhead, a suburb named after the very Supreme Court judge whose departure from this bench in 1985 was to mark the occasion for the appointment of His Honour. His Honour had a strong sense of duty and responsibility, whatever the task he was given, and further was tremendously proud of Australia, but also of being an Australian. And with the Second World War and Austin coming of age, he, like his father, therefore joined the armed forces. He chose the Royal Australian Air Force in 1944 with aspirations of becoming a fighter pilot, but those hopes were dashed on account of his eyesight. Not for you, they said. Of the alternatives offered, he chose radar operator because, as in his words, it sounded mysterious. The modern radar was still a recent invention, and the technology was to remain in a state of ongoing development throughout that war. After completing training with the other radio ops, he was sent to Darwin to serve in the network of radar station that spanned across the north coast of Australia. The Japanese were still occupying their conquered territories, including Indonesia, or the Dutch East Indies, as it was then known. Darwin was, of course, very different to how he had experienced it in the late 1920s and 30s when he grew up. The place was now teeming with soldiers, Australian and American alike. He has since reflected on the fact that this was the first time in Darwin that he encountered things such as crowds. His Honour was stationed at the very small West Montleved Island off the Western Australian north coast, which was home to radar station 344. Scanning for incoming enemy aircraft and assisting friendly outgoing aircraft, often engaged in bombing raids, was a 24/7 exercise, so there were usually 8 radio operators, 10 guards, and support crew on the island at any one time. They worked in teams of 3. One person would read the screen and adjust the direction of the radar using a manual handle. Another would plot on a large map the information relayed by the radar operator, and a third would then communicate the information to HQ. It was a small and at times a lonely place. His Honour recalled that the soldiers agreed that it was okay to befriend the many local lizards on the island, but if a lizard spoke back, then it was time to return to the mainland. His honour was to spend 8 months on West Montlivet before he was transferred to Radar Station 38 on Bathurst Island. His service in the Air Force was subsequently recognised by the award of the 1935 to 1945 Star, the 1939 to 1945 Defence Medal, the 1935 to 1945 War Medal, and the Australian Service Medal. It was to be the Territory's luck that Austin Asche, at 3 stages of his life, had occasion to spend time in Darwin before permanently moving here in 1986. I've already mentioned his time in Darwin during the most recent World War, but as most people know, his family moved to Darwin from Rabaul in what is now Papua New Guinea when Austin Asche was about 2 years old. He would spend the next 6 to 7 years, usually shirtless and shoeless, attend Darwin Primary School on Wood Street, and at times play with the administrator's daughter at Government House. Apart from a brief sojourn to Melbourne, he was to continue his education at Darwin Primary until the age of 12. He then moved to Melbourne to attend high school, and after the war, completed an arts degree and a law degree at the University of Melbourne. He himself has since reflected, following graduation from high school, that he considered becoming a teacher. But as he put it, in his family, the choice at the time was usually between becoming a lawyer or a doctor. There had been several lawyers on both sides of his family. His father had served as Crown Law Officer in Darwin, and being the only government lawyer in town, he had the responsibility of being the prosecutor, parliamentary draftsman, legal aid administrator, and general legal advisor to the government. Further, his paternal grandfather had been a lawyer in Norway, and there had been district court judges on the mother's side of the family. His third series of encounters with Darwin occurred after his appointment to the Family Court of Australia on the 5th of January 1976, following a successful career at the bar, practising predominantly in family and criminal law. It being a national court, and there not being sufficient volume of work to justify the appointment of a permanent family court judge in Darwin, a judge would regularly be dispatched to circuit to service the top end, about every 6 months or so. His Honour, being the second most senior judge on the court, had no qualms about pulling rank on his more junior brethren and sisters and calling dibs when there were cases to be heard up here. And we're all grateful to Chief Justice Evatt for permitting Austin Asche to pursue his passion for the Northern Territory in this manner. Your Honour served with him throughout his time at the family court, and there can be no real doubt that those trips to the north played a pivotal role in his decision to subsequently accept appointment to this court. And it was a place that he so obviously loved. There was an obvious glint of fondness in his eyes, and indeed happiness, whenever His Honour had occasion to talk about Darwin or the Northern Territory. He has referred to his invitation to join the local bench as a marvellous phone call, and one that he was eager to accept. He wanted to return to his hometown, to settle in and never leave again. As Austin himself put it, you can leave Darwin, but Darwin never leaves you. His Honour was an incredibly hard worker. He never turned down additional work and gladly welcomed it, notwithstanding the additional duties he had to discharge as Chief Justice. He would also make a point of ensuring that he attended the Alice Springs opening of the legal year and that he conducted the first yearly circuit sittings there. Saturdays were often spent writing judgment, and Alice Springs was no exception. One such circuit happened to coincide with the shooting of the movie Evil Angels, starring Meryl Streep and Sam Neill as Lindy and Michael Chamberlain. The Alice Springs Town Council had approved the cordoning off of part of Hartley and Parsons Streets over the weekend, so the filming of Meryl Streep walking up the stairs to enter the Magistrates' Court could proceed undisturbed. As was his habit, Austin Asche would enter the same building on Saturday mornings via another entrance to write his judgments for most of the day. And he was alarmed to be told by a staff member on the Friday afternoon that by council decree, his access to the building had been prohibited. His Honour was not a pushy man, but on this occasion he became uncharacteristically insistent. I have no intention of going anywhere near the movie crowd. I won't bother them if they don't bother me. A late Friday afternoon guarantee was eventually extracted from the Town Council to the effect that the film set security team would permit him to enter the building. Greeting His Honour on the day was a large crowd of extras outside the courthouse, some of whom had been instructed to shout, "She's guilty," while others had been told to yell, "Let her go, she's not guilty." And so it was. While Meryl Streep spent in excess of over 20 takes ascending and descending the steps in front of the building amidst a rowdy crowd in respect of one court case, that His Honour sat in the chambers at the rear of the same building, running away in respect of another. And of course, by the time His Honour left chambers in the late afternoon, the Hollywood crowd had packed up their gear and moved elsewhere. Judgment writing aside, there were other, less orthodox duties that Austin Asche performed as Chief Justice. He would at times receive courtesy calls in chambers at 9 a.m. from visiting heads of state, ambassadors, high commissioners, and highly ranked Defence Forces officers, as arranged by NT protocol. Another tradition that His Honour enjoyed in particular was the signing of the official documents to effect the adoption of a child. The parents and the child would attend his chambers for the ceremony, and there would be congratulations and morning tea, an entirely happy occasion. It was also during His Honour's time at the helm that the court moved from the old building to the one that we find ourselves in today. The planning phase was a time of regular meetings concerning various design aspects of the new building. The size of courtrooms, the layout of prisoner cells, the judges and the master's chambers, the sheriff's office and the registry, court recording and the library were all matters that made demands on His Honour's time. And on and back it would go between the Chief Justice's meeting with government officials and His Honour consulting with his fellow judges on the latest proposals. He has, in a different context, remarked that being a Chief Justice is like being the chairman of a body of strong-minded individuals. His Honour also headed up the team that organised the official opening of the building. The list of invitees was considerable, including ministers, local BOPs and interstate judges, many of whom expressed their envy at such magnificent facilities. I've already commented on his incredible work ethic. His Honour took on an unprecedented number of extracurricular responsibilities in his lifetime, including being involved in the formulation of the Commonwealth Family Law Act in 1975, which saw a move away from fault-based divorce. Whilst at the Victorian Bar, he was a part-time lecturer at the Family Law at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology and a part-time lecturer at the School of Social Studies at the University of Melbourne. He was a presidential member of the Institute of Family Studies, a member of the Family Law Council, chairperson of the Family Law Council Committee on Reproductive Technology, Honorary Colonel in Norforce, Chief Scout of the Northern Territory, Chairman of the Parole Board, President of the Northern Territory Division of the Red Cross Society, President of the Northern Territory Branch of the Scout Association, Knight of the Order of St. John's, a patron of the Vietnam Veterans Association of the Northern Territory, patron of the Retired Servicemen League. As you all knows, he believed in mateship, what it means to be Australian and to be proud of his country. He would be at the Anzac Day March and could subsequently be found at the RSL Club enjoying a beer. He held honorary doctorate in literature from Deakin University and a separate honorary doctorate in law from the Northern Territory University. He was adjunct professor at law at the Charles Darwin University, emeritus chancellor at Charles Darwin University, and finally, His Honour was the chairperson of the Northern Territory Law Reform Committee, a responsibility that he dutifully discharged well after turning 90 years old. He touched many lives during his time in the Territory. I was chatting to an elderly couple a few weeks ago. These are not people of any particular renown or any particular connection to the law or to education. I knew I would be preparing for today's occasion, and I asked on the off chance whether they happened to have come across His Honour. I know Austin Asche was the immediate and unified response on both of them. They were both bridge players, and it turned out that His Honour often made Government House available to the Darwin Bridge Club as a venue for playing of that particular game. But true to form, merely providing the facilities was not enough for His Honour. He took the time to welcome them as their host. And this he would do with his tale of the 13th tree. His Honour also had a keen interest in matters long past. Among those were the Icelandic sagas and anything Norse, possibly inherited from the Norwegian grandfather that I mentioned earlier. His knowledge of the topic was nothing short of extraordinary. And he combined this with another of his devotions, namely his beloved dogs in Darwin, who were all given traditional Norse names. First there was Olaf, then there was Hakon, or Håkon, depending on where you are from, and finally he had Freya. It is also well known that Austin Asche dedicated a large portion of his life to educational institutions. The development and promotion of a sound education system was one of his great passions. He served as a councillor and later as the chairperson of the Frankston State College, which was later to become Monash University Peninsula Campus. He was a member and then deputy president of the State College of Victoria. He was a fellow of the Australian College of Education. He was a member of the Council of Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, then became vice president and finally president. He served as the chairman of the 1979 inquiry into teacher education in Victoria. He was the chancellor of Deakin University from 1983 to 1987. He was a fellow of the Trinity College at the University of Melbourne. And that takes me to his involvement with the Northern Territory University College, as it was then called, immediately upon his arrival here in 1986. He accepted appointment to the College Council shortly after becoming a Supreme Court judge and was then promoted to chairman shortly thereafter. The importance of His Honour's work in transforming the college into the Northern Territory University cannot be underestimated. It was a long and arduous process for all involved. It's also worth noting that His Honour, during this time, donated his considerable personal collection of law books to the library of that institution. And he was immensely proud as a Territorian when the new university officially opened in 1989, and even more so because he had been chosen as its inaugural chancellor. It was a position that he treasured above much else, and it was with tremendous sadness that he had to relinquish it upon his appointment as administrator. But his legacy in respect of education lives on. The annual Northern Territory Training Awards, which recognise training excellence and achievements, have since 2012 been able to announce the Austin Asche Apprentice of the Year. The Charles Darwin University has since 2011 held the annual Austin Asche Oration in Law and Governance. The inaugural address was given by the Honourable Patrick Keane, the Chief Justice of the Federal Court at the time, and other orators since then have included Justice Kirby, Chief Justice Frantz, and Chief Justice Kiefel. At the Casuarina campus of Charles Darwin University, only a stone's throw away from the university bookshop, one finds Gulva, the Austin Asche Hall, the venue for graduation ceremonies and other significant university events. And the inscription on that hall is in the following terms. Austin Asche is a territory treasure whose relentless passion for tertiary education led to the establishment of the Charles Darwin University. I've mentioned that His Honour went to Darwin Primary School when he was a boy. It is at that very site on Wood Street that is now home of the recently opened Charles Darwin University Danala Education and Community Precinct. And when next walking past the precinct, you'll notice the magnificent barb tree at the front. It was almost 100 years ago that a young Austin would get in trouble from his teachers for climbing that very tree. A tree that now welcomes students to the very university that he was so instrumental in creating. And that then takes me to His Honour's investiture as the Companion of the Order of Australia. His Honour was awarded this, the highest Australian civil order possible, in 1994. It is only given for eminent achievement and merit of the highest degree in service to Australia or humanity at large. It was bestowed upon Austin Asche in recognition of his service to the law, to tertiary education, and to the community, particularly the people of the Northern Territory. And it was presented to him by the Governor-General at Government House in Darwin. Dr. Valerie Asche, his lifelong love and most loyal friend, would subsequently be made a member of the Order of Australia for service to science, particularly in the field of microbiology and to the community of the Northern Territory. His Honour may not have been a teacher by name, but he was very much one in substance. He led by example and served as an inspiration to everyone around him. A life well lived, indeed. A person who worked very closely with His Honour during his time both on the bench and the 4 years that followed at Government House, summed it up the best. He was one of the greatest men that I've ever known. May it please the Court.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Solicitor. Yes, thank you, Madam President.
If the Court pleases, I appear on behalf of the Australian Bar Association. It is a privilege to honour the life of the Honourable Austin Asche AC KC and to recognise his outstanding contribution to the legal profession, the administration of justice and the government and the people of the Northern Territory. As we have heard, Asche completed his secondary and tertiary education in Melbourne. Although he commenced his practice of the law in Melbourne, he first signed the bar roll in Queensland in 1951. For reasons that are unknown, at least to me and of those of whom I've made inquiries, Asche's sojourn to Queensland was short-lived. In 1954, he returned to Melbourne, where he signed the Victorian bar roll. Practice at the Victorian bar in 1954 was a very different beast to that which exists today. There were no e-briefs, no e-hearings, not even any emails. Asche was number 515 on the bar roll, although there were only approximately 200-odd barristers in active practice. At that time, it was customary that if you found yourself not in court on any given morning, then you would wander over to the common room in Owen Dixon Chambers for elevenses. The bar rule required you to sit next to the person who was already present, whether you liked them or not. It's fair to say that no one ever balked at sitting next to Asche. He was regarded universally as being thoroughly decent, charming, likeable, possessing old world qualities, never pushy, always understated. Moreover, he had a quality, unfortunately rare in some barristers: he was thoughtful before he spoke. In 1954, and throughout his practice as a barrister, counsel were required and expected to do anything and everything. There was little in the way of specialisation. Although recognised today for his contribution to family law, the Honourable Neil Brown KC recalls Asche appearing and advising in equity and trusts and in commercial litigation. At the other end of the legal spectrum, the Honourable Frank Vincent AO KC recalls Asche appearing on behalf of the accused in numerous criminal trials, including murder trials, when death was still the mandatory sentence in Victoria. Asche's inherent charm, his abilities as an advocate, and his legal intellect, which allowed him not only to advocate well for his client, but importantly to read the play, ensured the juries and clients loved him, prosecutors less so. Prior to the introduction of the Commonwealth Family Law Act, matrimonial cases were heard in the Victorian Supreme Court. The law required deserted wives and single mothers to first apply for maintenance from the father of the child prior to being entitled to receiving any support from the government. Asche felt great sympathy for the women in those circumstances and was involved in family law matters from his early days in practice. Asche played a pivotal role in the law reform which led to a federal approach to family law disputes. At a time when family law was regarded as work for lady barristers, Asche was one of the few men who worked in the area and was regarded as a leader in the field. In recognition of his outstanding contribution, Asche was the first Victorian appointed to the Family Law Court of Australia. The Honourable Diana Bryant AOKC, former Chief Justice of the Family Court, recalls appearing as a very junior practitioner before Asche in Perth. At that time, most senior barristers in Perth were not inclined to come to terms with the new legislation and left family law to the younger practitioners. Bryant recalls warmly the patience and, moreover, the encouragement and affirmation that Asche freely gave to those appearing before him. Before adjourning the court, Asche would espouse to each client, regardless of the outcome, their very good fortune in having been represented by such accomplished and capable counsel. Counsel who appeared before Asche recall that he was a patient, empathetic judge who was always civil and before whom parties always received a fair hearing. Asche was not only a barrister of his time, but an outstanding exemplar to all barristers of civility, legal acumen, court craft, and contribution to civil society. I will leave it to others to speak of his legendary parties at the Savage Club. May it please the Court.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, Mr Vice President.
May it please the Court. I rise on behalf of the Northern Territory Bar Association and say also that it is a privilege to speak here of His Honour's time among us. Those of us of a certain age had the pleasure, and it was a pleasure, to appear before His Honour many times, particularly in the days when we had the judges' interlocutory list as well as the masters' list. And I can echo the comments of Justice Mildren in his book that His Honour was, without exception, regarded as an excellent judge to appear before, with an exceptional grasp of legal principle. I expect that one of the reasons he was so pleasant to appear before was that he asked so few questions, because he thought that the less said, the sooner it was ended. But it did make for a pleasant time. I should say that there is someone here today who not only appeared before His Honour, and not only with His Honour, but instructed him when he was a junior at the bar in Melbourne. Mr Rex Wild KC, as he then wasn't, as an article clerk in Melbourne, used to instruct Mr Asche before he took silk. He was his regular go-to family lawyer. And it's these coincidences of territory practice that I can echo His Honour's comments that it's a difficult place to leave. His Honour was a judge and indeed a man of a bygone era, a more genteel age. He was, you could say, a Renaissance man with wide and deep interests from Latin and ancient Greek through to Australian literature. We all experienced his Churchillian vocabulary. I'm not sure if I heard it more than any others, but I seem to recall him a number of times at the close of submissions saying, "Sir, Mr Ford, stripped of all obfuscatory persiflage." I wasn't sure the first time if that was a compliment or what, but I soon learned that it wasn't. I understand at on his funeral, the famous cuttlefish defence was mentioned, and the sagacious mollusk puffing out clouds of inky blackness. It's become a favourite of every applicant for summary judgment, that case. His Honour was also very fond of Australian literature, very well versed in it. Mr Lindsay recalls appearing before him on an application for substituted service, going patiently through the affidavit, saying all the efforts that have been made to locate the man and serve him. And at the end of it, His Honour just summed it up and says, "So, Mr Lindsay, he's gone to Queensland roving and we don't know where." His Honour also had a very gentle humour that he employed when correcting us. On one occasion, I imagine it must have been an urgent application, a younger solicitor appeared before him without socks before it was the fashion. At the appropriate time, His Honour just said, "Race day, Mr Spazapak?"
Race day.
For all of that, he wasn't old-fashioned, he wasn't resistant to change. It was under his watch that case management was first introduced. The dreaded status assessment meetings, and when we were called up, usually before Justice Martin, to do the unthinkable then of having to explain to a judge why an action had been sat dormant for 2 and 3 years, it was outrageous. It also meant the death of the only Latin phrase that most lawyers love, adjourn sine die. It was not to be heard under His Honour's watch. Your Honours, for those who didn't have the pleasure and privilege of knowing him, his personality is captured in the portrait outside of this court, in the centre of the portraits, as he looks benevolently across the hall to one of his more recent successors on the other side, who returns the look with that penetrating... I'm going to say the penetrating gaze that we've come to know and love. Your Honours, I did also mean to mention Dr. Val Asche. We got to know her a little. There was one year when drinks at the end of the legal year were held at His Honour's house at Fanny Bay above the sailing club. I understand the profession as a whole is moving strongly for that tradition to be reinstated. I'm not sure if His Honour learned more about the local profession than he intended, because I think it was the one and only time that Your Honour, we do appreciate the time that his family lent him to us, and we appreciate the price that others have paid for him to be what he was to us. We are, and the court and the community, richer for his time among us. May it please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Honour. May it please the court, I rise to address the court on behalf of the legal practitioners of the Northern Territory. We celebrate the life of the Honourable Austin Asche, ACKC, and mark the extraordinary contribution that he made to the legal profession in the Northern Territory and the Northern Territory at large. The Honourable Austin Asche's contribution to the legal profession in the Northern Territory has been most carefully addressed today by the Solicitor General for the Northern Territory, the President of the Australian Bar Association, the Vice President of the Northern Territory Bar Association, and will be undoubtedly addressed by Mr John Stirk, 11th man, on behalf of the Alice Springs legal community. To say that the Honourable Austin Asche made a huge contribution to the legal profession in the Northern Territory is a bit like saying Usain Bolt is quite quick on his feet, or that Dame Judi Dench is a decent actress. So it's an understatement. The Honourable Dean Mildren notes in his text, Big Boss Fella All Same Judge, that the Honourable Austin Asche regarded himself as a black letter lawyer who saw it as his job to apply the law as it was written, rather than what he thought should have been written. And I'll get to that subject a little later. The Honourable Dean Mildren also observed that his judgments were written with style and precision, and on occasion humour was used to blunt what might have otherwise been devastating criticism. I enjoy reading His Honour's judgments, and I actually do so for entertainment. Some might say that's an unusual thing for a commercial solicitor to do, but the Honourable Austin Asche's judgments are a compelling read. One of those compelling reads is a classic judgment of the full court of the Court of Appeal. The Honourable Austin Asche sat with the Honourable Brian Martin one, and the Honourable David Angel one and only, and that judgment is in the matter of Alan Rowlands Holding and Gay No. 1 Proprietary Limited, and it's classic Asche. The Honourable Austin Asche referred to the verbal agreement, the subject of the proceedings, and said, and I quote, "Singular and plural nouns and verbs cavort gaily and inappropriately throughout the agreement." But it would be tiresome to mention this more than once. He also stated that in that case, that he felt that it was not necessary to detail the rather complicated history of the proceedings, and he observed, regrettably, it seems that this serial is to be continued, whatever the outcome of the appeal may be. Then there is the Veranda case, otherwise known as Maides and others versus Gamatsos and others. This is a case that involved procedural matters and an interpretation of the constitution of an association, and in particular, whether or not the committee acted constitutionally, and was a meeting properly called to seek the views of members about the desirability or otherwise of erecting a veranda. His Honour observed, "I cannot view this matter as so urgent that the time of this court be taken for what might be several days to the detriment of other cases, merely to interpret a constitution which in any event needs drastic revision, to announce some possible past irregularity upon which nothing immediate seems to depend, for the supposed benefit of an electorate which, composed as it is of descendants of the first and great democracies, will exercise its own judgment without the court's assistance and with, I would hope, the calm of Pericles and the wisdom of Socrates." And full steam ahead, His Honour also said that he did not accept a particular argument that the whole matter should be heard. He said it would be an encouragement for those who wish to obtain priority to dress up their arguments and present a complexity to the court on a simple matter. And His Honour then said that argument has about as much attraction and validity as that of a noisy queue jumper. Counsel for the plaintiff was probably not anticipating that outcome. Counsel for the defendants, one J.C. Kelly, no doubt has fond memories of His Honour's elegant disposition of that case with an order that the plaintiff pay the defendant's costs. Finally, completing my eclectic sampling of His Honour's stylish judgments, I refer to a case that I affectionately know as the Palm Tree case, otherwise known as Arthur and the Public Trustee. His Honour, with what seems to me to be a mix of steely determination and humour, said, "Mr. Pauling, I think, somewhat faintly in view of the authorities ranged against him, has urged us to have regard to, in inverted commas, velocity of social change," end of inverted commas, a phrase taken from the judgment of Glass J.A. in Allen and Snyder. If by that he is inviting us to apply subjective notions of fairness outside established principles, I cannot accede to that invitation. Darwin may be truly blessed with a colourful array of palm trees, but they are not therefore judges of this court to sit under. In April 1986, on the occasion of the swearing in of the Honourable Austin Asche as a judge of this court, he said, "But of course I make no secret at all of my liking for Darwin. Indeed, as you have observed, I have managed to come up to Darwin from the family law court far more often than any other judge in the family court. Very early in the formation of the family court, knowing that occasionally a judge would be deputised to come to Darwin, I announced publicly to my brother judges in the family court that I would use every dirty, low-down, rotten, sneaky, underhand means to get up to Darwin." His Honour then said, "I have fulfilled that promise quite satisfactorily." Continuing in the theme of understatements, the Honourable Austin Asche may well have said, if he was with us today, that his contribution to the legal profession and the Northern Territory at large was quite satisfactory. The entrance to Court 1 is guarded by former Chief Justices of this Honourable Court. The portrait of the Honourable Austin Asche by Danielle Bergstrom wonderfully captures the character of the Honourable Austin Asche. Today, he peers down from lofty heights of the foyer with an expression of interest and amusement. As he oversees the legal pantheon today, I think that he would be most content with today's proceedings. We remember the Honourable Austin Asche as a very fine Territorian and an extraordinary judge. May it please the Court.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Stirk.
Your Honours, I feel like I'm at the Rocky Horror Picture Show because I've had to take a quick jump to the left. But I'm also feeling, as I've been reminded, that I'm the tail end of batting at number 11, and those speaking before me have obviously got the best lines, but my inspiration is still Jason Gillespie, who managed to score 201 while normally batting at number 11, so there's hope yet. Austin was obviously the ultimate Renaissance man that I've ever met. Everyone's echoed those comments. I fortunately was practising in Darwin from 1980s, from all through the 80s, but in particular from 1986 when Austin came to this court. I have had regard to the ceremony that was conducted in 1986 when he was appointed as a replacement for Justice Jim Muirhead. Interestingly, at that time, the administrator was missing, and the administrator is missing again, but fortunately we've got two female past administrators who've stepped in where the males have failed to deliver. I was also fortuitously president of the Law Society for 2 years during that period of 7 years when Austin was the Chief Justice, and I can always remember things that he did in terms of the teaching that we've heard about, introducing this capacity for this court to adjudicate the year 11 and 12 law student moots from around the territory. So Austin sat there and we had young boys and girls somewhat, I think, overawed by what was going on, but was Austin the teacher? He was just phenomenal in doing what he did. Can I also reflect perhaps a little on what the Solicitor General has talked about in terms of the judges of those times and how things have moved on? Back in the 80s, we had judges who, a number of whom had experienced wartime service and then returned to post-war Australia, and sadly, Austin is the last of those. Jim Muirhead, who he replaced, used to tell me about his fairly grisly days in Rebel carrying flamethrowers at the end of World War II. Interestingly, Austin had lived as a very young boy in Rebel before his parents moved to the Territory. Sir William Foster, the first Chief Justice, had served in the RAAF, and Phil Rice, who was on the bench, had arrived in Alice Springs at the age of 2 on the first GAN train in 1929, had joined up as a stoker and post-war ended up as a Judge Marshal of the Royal Australian Naval Reserve. Both Phil and Austin, fortunately for all of us, came back to practice in the Territory. They'd spent their young years here, they returned. Phil Rice, in my humble opinion, was probably the greatest orator, second only to Ian Barker, that I've ever heard, but those two in combination were incomparable. We've also heard a little bit about Austin's time at Radar Station 344. He always told me that his Kimberley experience was such that he thought the Northern Territory ought to somehow annex the Kimberley. I never quite worked out how he was going to do it, but that was one of his lifelong themes. We need to get the Kimberley. Can I also just share a moment too about Val Asche, who, as Austin always said to me, was the superior intellect in their partnership of over 60 years. He thoroughly enjoyed, as he said, being the handbag at international conferences when Val was the keynote speaker. He said she was far more the keynote speaker than he ever was in his lifetime. So they were a mighty team. Can I just talk briefly as well about his time post-Queensland and back at the Victorian Bar in the probably from 54 on, but the information I've got primarily comes from John Coldry, who was a sometime Central Land Council lawyer, the second DPP in Victoria, and on the Victorian Court of Appeal and the Institute of Forensic Medicine for many years. John juniored Austin back in the 60s and 70s, and Austin himself said to me that his time in Queensland was learning poetry, because nothing much happened in the state of Queensland between 1951 and 1954, some might say for a number of years after that. But it gave him the time to learn his Australian poetry, and we've heard references to the banjo, and we'll come back to that in due course. His preeminence obviously was matrimonial causes, but as John Coldry tells me, by 1972 Austin had taken silk, and it was there that he and Austin started doing a number of murder trials. In 1972, the public solicitor in Victoria was responsible for organising representation, and John assures me in those days the average Victorian killer wasn't too flush with cash. Things have changed remarkably in Victoria in between, and obviously we have a better class of criminal who can afford eminent counsel. He used to tag team Frank Vincent, who we've heard about before, man who conducted over 300 murder trials at the bar. And the practice was that silks of any persuasion would do one murder trial for the public solicitor each year. John Coldry says there was some frisson for him as a junior because, as we've heard before, until 1975, the death penalty could still be pronounced in the event of a murder conviction. So John said he was always very nervous at these outstanding property and commercial silks who came to do murder trials. But fortunately, he said, in Austin's case, Austin just had a great skill in cross-examining witnesses with gentle persuasion, and his skill in addressing juries with wisdom and decency attracted their support. His final recollection was of an alleged contract killer who exhibited at all times high levels of aggravation. Austin simply said to him, A, B, C, always be calm. Meekness is not a characteristic of a paid killer. Aggression, on the other hand, is. So somehow ABC prevailed and they ended up with a manslaughter. There are a couple of cases that I perhaps should refer to finally, and I thank Justice Kelly for Mengle and the Northern Territory, where Austin had to consider what was referred to as just about every possible cause of action known to the law of torts by the plaintiff. For those who came in lately, to use the phantom expression, that was all about an elimination of TB in the Territory, and it was found that by Austin, the Territory stock inspectors had no power to do what they were doing, which was imposing restrictions on the movement of cattle. Everything failed, but Austin found for the plaintiffs applying what he referred to as the Beaudesert principle, which was from the High Court decision of Beaudesert, Shire Council and Smith. So the plaintiffs prevailed until the High Court decided they'd made a grave error in the case of Beaudesert, Shire Council and Smith, and therefore reversed the decision, which of course was binding on the judges of the Supreme Court. A young Peter Barr then quipped, "I've been through Beaudesert on a tort with no name." The other case that His Honour was involved in as part of a Court of Appeal was a somewhat epic case of the Northern Territory of Australia and SkyWest Airlines back in the late 80s. Brian Martin and Gary Downs were appearing for the Territory. Brian was a week before he was appointed to the Supreme Court. Dick Conti, who ended up on the Federal Court, a famous New South Wales Rugby League judiciary member, but more particularly famous for leaving on the Friday afternoon and leaving behind his erstwhile junior Wayne Martin, who became the Chief Justice in WA. For those who know Wayne, he needed a compass to navigate his way around Darwin. But we'll leave that to another time, another place. However, the big topic in that case was specific performance and whether or not the court could compel the Northern Territory government to comply with the contract. And somewhat wisely, Their Honours managed to dodge that decision and leave the Northern Territory to go and negotiate before deciding on what remedies might be appropriate. However, I can still remember young Wayne, after Dick Conti had left, advising the court that in the event that the Territory didn't comply, then the administrator should simply sack the government. Now that created a little bit of frisson late in the afternoon on a Friday, but we managed to get through that. Finally, I probably should just talk about what is perhaps known to a number of the people here today, and that is the annual March visit of the Asche family to Victoria. And every year, Austin and Val used to return for what they described as their missionary activity of persuading the burghers of Victoria that neither he nor Val had lost their marbles in moving to the Northern Territory. It culminated in the Asche family holding court in the Savage Club in Melbourne. Now, the Savage Club is far from savage. It was a place for thespians whose predilections were music, art, drama, literature and science. They were all things dear to the heart of Austin. It had been in place since 1894. It had been filled with the Heidelberg School painters in the early days, but moved to these very splendid premises in Banks Place in 1923. Those premises were purchased by one Robert Menzies on behalf of the club from the estate of Sir Rupert Clarke. But the circumstances were such, Rupert Clarke had died in 1899, but his mistress hadn't died until 1922, and she'd had a life estate in the property. So Savage Club then decided if it was good enough for Sir Rupert and his mistress, it was good enough for them. So it's a three-storey extravaganza. A number of you have been there. My final memory of Austin, because he took me there, he said, as part of my education. He used to point out that every living editor of the Age was always seated there somewhere, and every lunchtime there was always steak and kidney pie on the menu, as it had been since 1923. He gave a presentation on Australian poetry since Kenneth's Lesser going forward. It was an evening, and one worthy member had a medical episode which required the Victoria ambulance to climb 2 sets of stairs to remove the patient on a stretcher. It had been over 15 minutes. Austin then rose and said, "The show must go on." So we continued. In Austin's case, we've had a glorious 99 years. I certainly think it's unlikely I'm ever going to see the calibre of a man like Austin again. The Territory has lost its greatest son.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stirk. We conclude the proceedings by making a number of further brief acknowledgements. We acknowledge the presence here in court today of the Honourable Natasha Files, the former Chief Minister and former Attorney-General of the Northern Territory. We thank her for her attendance and the respect it shows to Austin's family and to the institution. We acknowledge the presence of Lorraine Martin, who of course had such a long association both with this court and with Austin and Valerie. We also acknowledge Margaret Babington, Marianne Mickey Warren and Freda Evans, all of whom also have a long association with this court and with Austin. We thank you for your presence and we're honoured by it. And finally, Chris Osborne, who I think was Austin's very last associate. We honour you and your particular connection to Austin. As is evident from what's been said by the speakers today, Austin had a deep and enduring commitment to the Northern Territory. His contribution to this community has been beyond measure. In addition to his many professional achievements and his deep learning, he was renowned for his wit and his generosity. He was always willing to listen to anybody who approached him and sought his advice or just his warm company. His Honour resided in Darwin until his death, and he will be sorely missed by this community. The judges of the court now invite you to join us in the foyer after these proceedings have concluded to continue this celebration of Austin's life. The court will now adjourn.